Good evening from Belgrade, Serbia, and welcome to another Fantazmo Artstream, boys and girls. Today we continue to do this illustration of Jarok the Hunter again and again. It will take about a few more streams, I think, to finish it. Then we will switch to background and some other stuff for After Effects animation. So I also changed this thing called the eyes over here, and we'll see how it's gonna be at the end, you know. Without further ado, let's draw. So now I'm actually redefining and adding the illustrative values to parts of this guy's costume. Matilda, I'm drawing as well, Mr. Dushan. Oh, I'm so glad to hear that, man. Open a Discord, you won't be disappointed, I promise. Okay. If you draw some swastikas and penises, I'm gonna kill you, but let's see. Throw it in the art feedback. Let's see. This snake, man. It's awesome. Come on. Whoa. Whoa, nicely done. Let's print screen and share it here. It's really good, man. So you actually drew it from this drawing, yeah? It's really good. Well done, Matilda, well done. I started 10 minutes ago. Yeah, nice. Nice. Doing great, man. Keep up the good work, and also throw on Discord again when you reach some checkpoints, you know? It's really good. Where did you find this reference? It's a cool drawing. Yeah, I want to do it fast as practice to understand forms and then try to draw without. I'm not doing colors or... yeah, that's good. I'm not drawing colors and shading and all of that. I want to learn how to sketch more. That's really good. Just, you know, for example, like 3 or 4 times by doing that, you're gonna skyrocket your skill, you'll see. Because your brain will learn the patterns, you know, and even without thinking about them, you'll be able to repeat some. Yeah, we should actually go through like anatomy sketches here on my stream sometimes. I would actually take some pictures of anatomy and I'll redraw them slowly on the stream so we can all learn from it, you know. I will try to simplify it first to um, how to say it, to reassemble it as a basic geometric shapes, you know. You found it on Pinterest, nice. I didn't visit Pinterest for like many years, I think. It's great. It's great either for reference or a bunch of other cool stuff. Some people also like DeviantArt, but I'm not a fan of it. You know, I don't know. It's like too many anime there. Everything is anime. At least it was like 6 or 7 years ago. Sick. I did another 20 minutes earlier. Check image on Discord when you wanna. Yeah, let's do it now. I'm not in a hurry with this, so. Okay, let me paste here. Not cursed at all. Great job, man. This guy on the upper part reminds me on Murlocs, you know, from World of Warcraft. It's really cool, man. Also, when you draw this stuff, especially when you draw by your own without any concrete reference, try to imagine this parts as like geometric shapes or something, you know. And when you do that, it will be much easier to understand them, you know. Pum, pum, pum. Great job, man. Yep, I'm trying, but it's damn hard. Yeah, man. I also struggle with art all the time, man. No matter how much experience I manage to grind over years, you know. That's why I want to practice just mumbling, jumbling, only pencils. Yeah, it's like the best way to learn stuff like that. Not like that, but generally to be better at art is to draw and paint less at the not at the beginning, but constantly. You know. So good job, man. Good job. The job well done. So this part should have like most of the shade out of all parts from this object. Okay. Damn it. Sec. I need to raise this a little bit because if you can see, his left part of the body is risen more than the right part, you know, so therefore muscles from the breasts and back are also moving up. That's why we also need to push up this part of armor. Costume, not armor. This is not armor. This cannot be armor by any means. See something. Before I continue to do this, maybe I need to rework a little bit of this design, just a little bit. I remember back in like maybe 4 years ago when I streamed on Twitch, somebody wrote in comments, "Oh wow, your artwork is really beautiful. I would like you to do a commission for me for $20." I was like, dude, I can give you $20 not to ask me that the question ever again, you know? Guy was ludicrous. $20, man. I guess people are doing art for other commissions for more than symbolic amount of money. I guess those are kids or something, so they actually devalue themselves, you know. Also making a problem for other artists. Let's redesign it a little bit. Later on I'm gonna draw this cape. I just wanna use this shadow behind this object so that I could define its shape, you know. Like this. Where was I? Ah, yes. One second. It's work. Let me see, I hope. Yeah, I'm tagged. Okay, let's see. One sec. I'm back. I hate when I need to correct other artists' work. I mean professional work, because every artist does his job in a different way. For example, I hate masks. I completely ejected them out of my workflow a few years ago because they tend to make illustration more plastic, especially if you're using it early on, clipping masks, and people use them a lot very early, and they're not merging at all. They're just they just end up with a simple illustration having like 50 layers, which is idiotic, because if you tend to like have a shit ton of layers, Every next one will make more and more latency for your brush, and I have like 32 what is it, megabytes or gigabytes of DDR memory. So even with that, I had like a huge latency in my brush. And not just that, when others have a shit ton of layers which they didn't explain. 1 second. Where was I? Yeah, like problem with layers. So people tend to make image with a shit ton of layers, which is okay, but by the time you actually give it to another person in the art team, it needs to be neat, and it must not have like shit ton of layers, because somebody else will work on your art. It needs to be clean and simple, so others can manipulate and change and edit your artwork further, you know. So if you get, for example, an PSD file with a shit ton of layers and masks, and nothing is named, everything is like you see like here, layer 22, layer 23, and nothing is named, other artists can't do shit, you know. It would take like 5 hours for me just to figure out what layer actually does what in the picture, you know. And yeah, where was I? Yeah, clipping masks and that stuff in Photoshop. I never use them, and if I do, I only use them in like ending part of the illustration, like final touches and that stuff. This music is too low for me, not for you. For you it's okay, I guess. Okay, let's do this one now. So I'm actually, when I'm painting, I'm just adding layers, and I'm just merging them at the end. And when I'm finished, for example, with the design, then I merge them, and that's it. But later on, if I do some kind of magic and glows and reflections, I do them in separate layers, you know, so that's it. Wait, what the fuck? Is it like this? No. Yeah, it's like this. Okay. I'm off to smoke one cigarette and I'll be like back in 5 minutes. Yeah, I'm back. Pav the Chosen One. Hello, Pav the Chosen One. Welcome to Fantazmo Artstream, my man. Okay. Okay, we can merge this and continue. Because we need to make this cloak a bit older, so I already done this render. And I'm gonna continue doing it that way. Music got loud all of a sudden. One sec. Okay. Boom, 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 boom. Boom, 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 boom. So I ate a bunch of moussakas that my mother cooked for me today, and I feel like I'm actually playing a trombone out of my ass throughout the entire day. I guess it's because of milk. Pom, 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 pom. Okay, let's now merge this and let's break this a little bit. We don't want those typical straight lines. Also, I need to change the brush a little bit. It's too much bright. This also. So, Pav, the chosen one, where are you watching from, if I may ask? If you're still here, which I doubt. It's okay, I guess, for now. We'll be back on it later on. So since light comes from this side, we'll actually have to make this part of cloth brighter. More light here, a little bit, not too much. Like this. Damn it. Yeah, I guess it's okay now. Okay, let's merge these layers. And see how I actually did this upper part of the stuff. I'm gonna actually do it also here. I'll try to actually copy this to save some time and see how it's gonna look. And if it sucks, I'm just gonna do it again, you know, from scratch. Give me a sec just to see. Yeah, it needs to be more dark. Yeah, like this. Okay. Yeah. Bunch of time saved. I'm gonna copy this and also use it here. Just give me a sec. Let's add some perspective. Not distort, but perspective. Just a little bit. So that I don't have to do it again and again. Okay, let's clean it up now and paint it like it makes some sense, you know? Matilda, how are you doing? How's the progress going? Are you satisfied? What's going on? Sorry, I think my... What the fuck? This is strange. Okay, never mind. OBS got bugged or something. Oh. Okay, I'm gonna go for another smoke. And since chat is silent, I think when I get back, I'm gonna put some audiobook or something fine to listen to. Give me like 5 minutes. I'm back. Hello. So, where was I? Yes, I'm thinking about actually changing from music to some kind of documentary until chat gets more involved with stream. So let's see. Was this magic in ancient Egypt? Sounds interesting. Let's take a look.
The principle of magic.
No, this is only 2 minutes long. I want something more thorough, how to say. The Egyptian Book of Thought, a real ancient Egyptian initiation ritual, hermetic philosophy. Let's see something else. Ooh, we actually have some reliable documentary about Egypt, Fall of Pharaohs. So this channel is called Fall of Civilizations. If you didn't watch it, I highly recommend it. It's a beautiful documentary podcast that actually describes rise and fall of different ancient civilizations throughout history of humans.
In particular, Aristotle. At the turn Around the year 1200 AD, the medieval Arab traveller and scholar Abd al-Latif al-Baghdadi departed from his hometown of Baghdad and set out on a journey of exploration. As a young man, al-Baghdadi had studied law, medicine, and philosophy, and was inspired by the works of classical philosophers, in particular Aristotle. At the turn of the 13th century, al-Baghdadi embarked on a series of journeys that would take him to many of the great cities in the region. He traveled to Mosul, to Jerusalem, Damascus, and Aleppo, and eventually, around the year 1204, his journey took him across the Sinai Desert to the banks of the Nile. On his travels, al-Baghdadi wrote a book that was part travel account and part philosophy, entitled The Book of Edification and Admonition. In it, he recalls the remarkable impression that Egypt made on him.
إن أرض مصر من البلاد العجيبة الآثار الغريبة الأخبار وهي واد يكتنفه جبلان شرقي.
Egypt is a land of wondrous monuments and strange stories. It consists of a valley enclosed by two ranges of hills, one to the east and one to the west. The Nile runs between them until it reaches Lower Egypt, where it divides into branches, all of which flow out into the sea. The Nile is unusual for its length. We know of no other river in the inhabited world that covers a greater distance.
وهذا النيل له خاصة الأولى بعد مرمى فنحن لا نعلم في المعمورة نهرا أبعد مسافة منه.
As al-Baghdadi traveled around Egypt, he was struck by the incredible variety of ancient remains he saw, great temples of stone and tomb complexes crumbling beside the waters of the Nile. But none of these compared to the most fabled of all Egypt's monuments, which rose over the horizon not far from the city of Memphis, at a place called Giza.
أما ما يوجد بمصر من الآثار القديمة فشيء لم أر ولم أسمع بمثله.
The ancient monuments in Egypt are such as I have never seen nor heard tell of in other lands. First among them are the pyramids. They are very numerous. All are situated on the Giza side of the Nile and extend in the direction of Memphis, spread out along a distance of about 2 days' journey. Some are big, others small. Some are of clay and mud brick, but most are of stone. Some are stepped, but most of them taper smoothly.
And of all these pyramids, 3 stood out for their seemingly impossible immensity.
Yes, exactly.
وأما الأهرام المتحدث عنها المشار إليها الموصوفة.
Turning to the pyramids that everyone talks about, points at, and characterizes in terms of their sheer size, there are 3, laid out in a straight line at Giza. 2 of them are particularly enormous, and it is with these 2 that the poets have been infatuated. The spectacle is so awe-inspiring that your sight will falter as you try to take it all in.
وحسر الطرف عند تأمله.
Al-Baghdadi wrote accounts of the local people who lived close to these vast remains. He describes some who climbed to the tops of these structures, and others who quarried them for their fine-cut stone. Others still became obsessed with exploring the hidden tunnels and chambers that branched out beneath the pyramids.
وقد سلك في بناية الأهرام.
In one of the great pyramids, there is an opening that allows people to gain entry. It leads them into narrow corridors, labyrinthine passageways, well shafts, pitfalls, and other such features as appear in the accounts of those who venture inside and explore the innermost parts. Many people, obsessed by the pyramid and filled with fanciful ideas about it, are inspired to penetrate its depths. But they always end up at some place beyond which they cannot go. They spoke of how the pyramid was full of bats, and how these bats grow to the size of pigeons. There are inscriptions on the stones, written in the ancient characters that no one understands. In the entire land of Egypt, I have never found a single person who so much as claimed to have heard of anyone who knew how to read them.
He even seems to have visited the Sphinx nearby, which was then buried up to its neck in the sands.
Also, by the 3 pyramids, at a distance from them of rather more than a bowshot, the likeness of a most enormous head and neck protrudes from the ground. The people call it Old Father Dread, and assert that its body is buried in the ground. The face is handsomely, indeed admirably portrayed, with a touch of elegance and beauty about the features, as if a smile were playing across them.
Above all, al-Baghdadi was impressed by the mastery of engineering it must have required to build such constructions, and to have them survive for such a stretch of time.
فإذا اقتربت منه وأفردته بالنظر هالك مرآه.
The construction of the pyramids was carried out according to a methodology remarkable in respect both to design and to precision of execution. This is what has enabled the pyramids to endure time's passing eras. Or rather, it has meant that time itself has had to endure the era of the pyramids. Noble intellects gave the pyramids their all. Pure minds exhausted their every effort for their sake. Enlightened souls outpoured their loftiest capabilities on their design to stand as exemplars that are the pinnacle of the possible. Because of this, they all but speak aloud of their builders, telling us what sort of folk they were, giving voice to their intellects, relating the stories of their lives and times.
When al-Baghdadi visited Giza around the year 1200, the Great Pyramid was the tallest man-made structure in the world, and had been for more than 3,700 years. All that time, it had testified to the greatness of the civilization that had grown up on the banks of the Nile, a civilization that had passed through countless periods of flourishing and decay, and then finally disappeared beneath the sands of the desert. My name's Paul Cooper, and you're listening to the Fall of Civilizations podcast. Each episode, I look at a civilization of the past that rose to glory and then collapsed into the ashes of history. I want to ask, what did they have in common? What led to their fall? And what did it feel like to be a person alive at the time, who witnessed the end of their world? In this episode, I want to tell the story of one of the most iconic cultures ever produced by humankind, the civilizations of Egypt's Nile Valley. I want to show how this series of related societies grew up in the floodplains of their great river and built some of the most enduring and recognizable structures in the world. I want to tell the story of how they rose, how they endured, and how they finally faded from history altogether. The story of Egypt is one of the greatest and longest epics in all of history. Many empires would consider themselves lucky to last through the reigns of 31 kings, but ancient Egypt would see the reign of 31 dynasties of kings, lasting for more than 3,000 years. In the time since, historians have long struggled with this panoply of rulers and eras, and have tried to wrestle the history of Egypt into neat categories. They typically split its history into 3 sets of dynasties, commonly known as the Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom, and the New Kingdom. Between these are a number of intermediate periods, when the central power of its kings failed and the land divided. Throughout this history, Egypt's empire would ebb and flow, just like the great river that gave it life. That river was the greatest watercourse of the entire Afro-Eurasian landmass, the River Nile. The Nile finds its source in Lake Victoria, the largest lake in Africa. It's a body of water about the size of Georgia, or nearly the size of Ireland. The gigantic Lake Victoria drains into the river known as the White Nile, which is joined by the so-called Blue Nile further downstream at Khartoum, the capital of Sudan. From there, it flows for a further 2,000 kilometers across the Nubian and Egyptian deserts to Cairo, where it branches out into a wide delta and empties into the Mediterranean Sea. Next to the Amazon River, the Nile is either the longest or second longest river on Earth. It runs for 6,800 kilometers, or around a sixth of the way around the Earth, and its drainage basin covers a tenth of the entire landmass of Africa. Egypt itself has an extremely arid climate, and its inland territories experience virtually no rainfall. If geography had been only a little different, and Lake Victoria had not begun to drain westwards, we can only imagine how differently history might have gone. For at least the last 5,000 years, every blade of grass and every tree in the Nile Valley, every animal and every person to ever live, every priest and every king owes their existence solely to this river. Human presence in Egypt is among the oldest in the world. After evolving in the region of East Africa, modern humans migrated primarily along this corridor, and from there spread to the rest of the world. The Nile is, in a sense, the highway down which all of humanity has once passed. As one of our first stops along our great journey, Egypt is home to human remains of astonishing antiquity. Stone tools worked by archaic humans have been discovered in Nile deposits dating to as early as 600,000 years ago, and modern Homo sapiens followed in the last 100,000 years or so. These migrations likely happened during one of the many African humid periods that have occurred over the last millions of years. These are times when shifts in the planet's climate caused rains to fall on the Sahara Desert. During these periods, the desert bloomed into a verdant grassland, home to animals and people. And when the period ended, the grasses would die, the animals would leave, and the sands would return. It's thought that this cycle has occurred more than 200 times since the desert first formed 8 million years ago. The earliest peoples in this region lived by hunting and fishing, and left behind stone tools and a multitude of rock paintings. From about the year 13,000 BC, in one of the Sahara's driest periods in history, the Sibyllian culture began gathering wild wheat and barley, and from there developed their own domesticated strains. From 9000 BC, people began to weave thread from wool, and another humid period began. One enigmatic stone circle at the desert site of Nabta Playa dates to around 7500 BC, when the Sahara was a range of rolling grasslands once more. This stone monument may have been used to mark the movements of stars at different times of the year, so that people could keep track of cycles like the harvest and the migration of animals for hunting. Nabta Playa has been called Egypt's Stonehenge, but this doesn't quite do it justice, since it was built at least 5,000 years before the first stones of Stonehenge were ever laid. When the last ice age ended and the Sahara once more dried up, any peoples who had been living and herding in its grasslands would have been driven out of their ancestral home. They would have wandered across the newly formed desert until they reached the only stretch of green in the midst of all that sand. That was the banks of the Nile, and here they would make their home. These peoples would build a collection of scattered settlements reaching up and down the river. But slowly, as more and more people were driven to the riverbank to survive, these began to coalesce into larger towns, cities, and finally, kingdoms. The ancient Egyptians referred to the whole region by the name the Two Lands, referring to the long Nile Valley in the south and the delta that spread out in the north, close to the sea. These were the two lands that today we call Upper and Lower Egypt. Surprisingly for a modern person who orients their maps facing north, the Egyptians thought of their world in the opposite direction. As a consequence, their word for east was the same as their word for left, and west the same as right. In the Egyptian mind, they were always facing upstream, waiting for the annual floods to arrive. If you find this confusing as we continue, just remember that southern Upper Egypt is the region upstream, and northern Lower Egypt is downstream. For many people at this time, the lands along the riverbank would have constituted their entire world. The Egyptians referred to the river's floodplain as Kemet, or the Black Land, due to the rich dark soil left behind by its life-giving floods. This land was the realm of the noble god Horus, who had the head of a falcon, the god of life, protection and healing. If you walked just an hour in either direction, you would soon reach what they called Deshret, or the Red Land. This was the inhospitable desert stretching out on all sides, roasting hot, largely devoid of water and shade, and inhospitable to most life. These deserts were presided over by the god Set, the god of chaos and violence. The Nile itself they knew simply by the name Iteru, or the river, since in their world there was no other. The Egyptian world began in Upper Egypt, far up the reaches of the Nile, at a place now known as Aswan. Here, a belt of hard granite crosses the landscape and forces the river waters into shallow whitewater rapids, running over boulders and through rocky channels called cataracts. This word comes from the Greek word kataraktes, or rushing down. Today, the waters of these cataracts have been tamed by the construction of the Aswan Dam, but in ancient times, they could be a rushing torrent. Each year, when the floodwaters passed through this rocky stretch of the river, they made such a thundering sound that the earth itself could shake, and this led the ancient Egyptians to believe that the waters were coming up from beneath the earth, bursting out of vast subterranean seas. At Aswan, they built a temple on an island in the middle of those rushing waters, and here worshipped that primeval force. The fast-flowing waters at Aswan made it a natural barrier to ships and prevented any further exploration upriver. For this reason, for much of its early history, this was where ancient Egyptian influence ended, the final extent of their power and border of their empire. Beyond Aswan was the southern lands of Nubia, and for this reason, Egyptians would also refer to it as the narrow gateway to the south. The temple island in the Aswan cataracts was known to the Egyptians as Abu, the Egyptian word for elephant, since it was a hub for the ivory trade with these southern lands. The Greeks would follow this example and named the place Elephantine. From here, trade caravans would pass overland south to the Darfur region of Sudan, bringing gold, ivory, and other goods. But north of Aswan, everything was considered to be Egypt, as Herodotus records.
All the land watered by the Nile in its course was Egypt, and all who lived lower down than the city Elephantine and drank the river's water were Egyptians. Such was the oracle given to them.
Luckily for the Egyptians, the Nile flows from the south to the north, while the prevailing winds blow in the other direction, meaning that you could use the winds to sail against the current as far as Aswan without too much effort. But the return journey would be even easier, allowing the river waters to simply carry you along. A ship heading downstream to the north from Aswan would see for some time only rocky desert, and the river bordered by cliffs of hard Nubian sandstone. This is not a land well suited to agriculture, but in ancient times these valleys were sources of natural resources, like gemstones, copper, and gold. Further north, the red cliffs fall away, and the floodplain around the river gets wider. Here, the landscape would have blushed green, and a larger population could be supported. It was in this region that the desert city of Thebes would grow up, which the Egyptians called Waset. This would one day become the most powerful city in Upper Egypt, the capital of the desert regions. The living part of an Egyptian city, its houses and markets and workshops, tended to be built on the eastern bank of the river, where the sun rises, while the western bank, where the sun set, was used only for burials and tombs. Sailing further north, you would reach the area we call Middle Egypt, and the floodplain gets wider still. This region would have been full of wildlife and vegetation. Some way to the west of the river, the waters divert and fill a large oasis known as Fayoum, which sprouts like a broad leaf from the stem of the Nile. In ancient times, this lake was home to large populations of Nile crocodile, so that the settlement on the shore would be known by the Greeks as Crocodilopolis, or Crocodile City. Here, Egyptians apparently even tamed crocodiles in their temples, as Herodotus recounts.
Now, for some of the Egyptians, the crocodiles are sacred animals. Those who dwelt about Thebes and about the lake of Moiris hold them to be most sacred, and each of these two peoples keep one crocodile selected, which has been trained to tameness. And they put hanging ornaments of stone and of gold into the ears of these, and anklets round the front feet. And they give them food appointed and victims of sacrifices, and treat them as well as possible.
In other places, crocodiles were hunted for food, using ingenious but risky methods.
A man puts the back of a pig upon a hook as bait and lets it go into the middle of the river, while he himself upon the bank of the river has a young live pig, which he beats, and the crocodile, hearing its cries, makes for the direction of the sound. And when he is drawn out to land, first of all the hunter plasters up his eyes with mud, and having done so, he very easily gets the mastery of him. But if he does not do so, he has much trouble.
Also living in the river were the animals that the Greeks would call river horses, or hippopotamus, our hippopotamus.
The river horse is sacred in districts of Papremis, but for the other Egyptians it is not sacred. And this is the appearance which he presents. He is four-footed, cloven-hoofed like an ox, flat-nosed, with a mane like a horse, and showing teeth like tusks, with a tail and voice like a horse, and in size as large as the largest ox. And his hide is so exceedingly thick that when it has been dried, shafts of javelins are made of it.
The most strategically important location was what the Egyptians called the balance of the two lands. This was the place where the river split into its delta. As the crossroads between Upper and Lower Egypt, this was always the natural place for the capital when the empire was united. This location would give rise to the city of Memphis, and in turn to modern Cairo. And it is here that the Egyptians would build their most famous and lasting monuments. Each year, the monsoon rains falling in the highlands of Ethiopia and Central Africa would swell the river, and the annual flood would arrive. This happened with such regularity around the middle of August that the Egyptians timed it using the rising of the star Sirius. In the 5th century BC, Herodotus wrote the following description of these floods.
When the Nile is in flood, it overflows in places as far as 2 days' journey from either bank. The Nile comes with a rising flood for 100 days from the summer solstice, and when this tale of days is complete, it sinks again with a diminishing stream, so that the river is low for the whole winter, till the summer solstice again.
The Egyptian year was divided into 3 seasons: the flood season of Akhet, the growing season of Peret, and the harvest season of Shemu. Once the floodwaters receded in early autumn, the land was refreshed and fertilized with rich Nile mud, and new crops could be grown. In this black mud, farmers grew emmer wheat, barley, beans, and lentils throughout the cooler winter season, and when summer came again, the grain was ready to be harvested. Egyptian life was held in this delicate balance. Each year, if the river flooded too little or too much, the results could be devastating, as one ancient Egyptian hymn to the Nile makes clear.
إرعون إيب مني طائر جرف ور شري حرنمي شبب رمت خفت خسفف قدف سو غن.
If he is greedy, the whole land suffers. Great and small fall moaning. People are changed at his coming. When he rises, then the land is in joy. Then every belly is glad. Every jaw has held laughter.
سو امدوات بتا ارختف محو جاو سوسخ شنوت رديخت النمحو.
Since their lives depended so greatly on these floods, the Egyptians developed ingenious systems for measuring them. At the cataracts of Aswan, they built a series of devices known as Nileometers. These often take the form of towers with deep wells inside that allow the river to flow in, with measurements inscribed on their walls in Egyptian cubits. Each year, ancient people would anxiously check these Nileometers to see how high the water was rising that year, and whether it would be a time of famine, a time of plenty, or a time when they would need to hastily build some flood defences. During the period known as the pre-dynastic era, the two halves of Egypt were divided, and this division was cultural as well as political. The desert people of southern Upper Egypt worshipped their own god, Nekhbet, who was commonly depicted as a griffin vulture, a powerful and majestic bird. These people were likely darker skinned and had more of a cultural and linguistic connection with the southern lands of Nubia and sub-Saharan Africa, their rulers sometimes even intermarrying with the royalty of southern kingdoms. Meanwhile, the people of northern Lower Egypt paid deference to the god Wadjet, usually shown as an Egyptian cobra. They had more genetic influence from North Africa and the Mediterranean, and may have been somewhat lighter skinned. The kings of southern Upper Egypt ruled while wearing a white bulbous crown, while the kings of the north wore a red crown with a spiraling representation of a cobra emanating from it. The kingdoms that ruled over these regions were always fluid, but the geographical distinction between Upper and Lower Egypt always held sway. But around the year 3000 BC, or more than 5,000 years ago, all that began to change. That was because of a king of a kingdom called Thinis. His name was Narmer. The figure of Narmer is wreathed in mystery, and what little we know about him has been pieced together from fragments of inscriptions and a few significant artifacts. Narmer was born under the personal name Menes, but chose Narmer as his Horus name, or king name, when he came to the throne of Thinis. And this name perhaps gives us some sense of his personality. That's because Narmer means something like fighting catfish. The Nile catfish that the king clearly admired is a remarkable species. It's a predatory fish, a nocturnal hunter that can grow up to 1.2 meters long, or about the size of a dolphin, and uses a form of naturally generated electricity as a weapon. Using a unique organ in its body, it can generate an electric shock of up to 350 volts that stuns its prey. In the largest catfish, this shock can be enough to stun an adult human, and the Egyptians were fascinated by this unique property. They depicted these shock and awe predators on painted wall murals, and even experimented with using the weak electric charges of young specimens as a treatment for arthritis. We might imagine that this King Narmer wanted to emulate some of the characteristics of these surprise hunters, but whether it was their patience lying in wait for their enemies, the tenacity of their surprise attacks, or the shock and awe with which they stunned their prey, we may never know. Virtually the only source we have for this period is a carving known as the Narmer palette, which contains only a handful of cryptic clues. One side of this carved artifact shows King Narmer standing over a defeated enemy, gripping him by the hair in one hand and raising a mace in the other. It's a clear sign of domination. Here, Narmer is shown wearing the white, bulbous crown of his native Upper Egypt, suggesting that he bludgeoned his rivals there into submission. On the other side, the carving shows the king leading an army, while ranks of his defeated enemies lie before him. Below this, an image of a bull is shown tearing down the walls of a fortress with its horns. On this side of the carving, Narmer is wearing the red crown of Lower Egypt. From this, we might assume that he set out on a campaign of conquest and successfully brought the two lands of Egypt together. Two mythical animals carved on one side of the Narmer palette stand with their long necks intertwined, perhaps representing the coming together of the two sides of Egypt, their lives and their fates now inextricably bound. This was a union that would see the newly united Egypt grow to become one of the most influential societies in early human history. At first, Egyptian culture was heavily influenced by the slightly older civilizations of Mesopotamia, like the Sumerians. Egyptian palaces were often built to a Sumerian design, and they used Sumerian motifs in their art too. But by at least the year 3000 BC, Egypt had matured its own indigenous artistic culture and its own system of writing. The Greeks would later refer to these by a word which means sacred carving, or hieroglyph. The Egyptian hieroglyphs are a mixed writing system that uses a variety of phonetic symbols, as well as a collection of symbols that represent whole words. For example, an image of a man holding up his hand to his mouth could be used to represent the common word eat, but other symbols that represented groups of consonants could be used to spell out other less common words, names, or places. Hieroglyphs emerged a little after the invention of cuneiform in Mesopotamia, and it's possible they were inspired by this older writing system. In Mesopotamia, we can see the gradual evolution of the cuneiform writing system from its earliest symbolic roots. But in Egypt, the earliest discovered example of hieroglyphs show the symbols springing into existence already fully formed in a complex system. This suggests that they may have been developed all at once as a conscious effort, and were perhaps even devised by a single person. The Egyptian hieroglyph for ruler was the shepherd's crook, since the king was considered to be a kind of shepherd for his people. Egyptian kings would even symbolize their royalty by holding a gilded, curved crook, modeled after those used by shepherds. And these kings have come to be known as pharaohs. Inscription on the walls of a tomb for the pharaoh Unas gives a sense of the kinds of prayers and blessings that might have been spoken while these rituals took place. This one to the sun god Amun-Ra and the moon god Thoth.
را بي حنا جحوتي شدن تنو ونيس حنا تنو ونمف ونمتنو إيم.
Sun and Thoth, take Unas with you, that he may eat of what you eat of, that he may drink of what you drink of, that he may sit where you sit, that he may sail in what you sail in. The booth of Unas is plaited of reeds. The flood of Unas is in the marsh of offerings. His feast is among you, gods. The water of Unas is wine, like the sun. Unas will circumnavigate the sky like the sun. Unas shall course the sky.
مير را خنس ونيسبت مير جحوتي.
Upon coming to the throne of the newly united Egypt, King Narmer built a new capital, perfectly placed at the balance of the two lands, where the river met the delta. This city would become known as Inebu Hedge, or the City of White Walls, but today we know it as Memphis. The kings who followed Narmer would rule from this new capital, but they spent much of their time travelling between palaces, and when they died, their bodies were still taken back to Narmer's home region of Thinis in Upper Egypt, to be mummified and buried in the city's ancestral burial ground at Abydos. That was until the reign of a king named Hotep Sakemwi. He ruled from about 2900 BC and started what has been called the Second Dynasty of Egypt. And he took the decision to start a new burial ground near Memphis, so that Egypt's pharaohs could be buried close to their new capital. For the site of this new burial ground, he chose a place on the western bank of the river, the side where the sun sets, at a vast open place called Saqqara. Saqqara is situated on a raised plateau that the floodwaters of the Nile do not reach. Visually, it would have been striking to ancient people as the place where the green riverlands end and the dead sand of the desert abruptly begins. For this reason, it may have been considered a crossing place between death and life, the perfect place for a necropolis or a city of the dead. For kings who wanted their tombs to be remembered, it also had the benefit of being highly visible from the new capital of Memphis. Over the coming centuries, this site would become full of tombs of kings and queens, and countless royal attendants and nobles who followed them into the afterlife. At first, these tombs were built in a form known as a mastaba, large rectangular constructions built of mud brick, and promising their inhabitants a rebirth into the next life. These could be very large, but they were still relatively unassuming. But soon, Egyptian pharaohs would get even more ambitious with their burial arrangements. This ambition truly began with the rule of a pharaoh named Netjeriket-Joser. The reign of Djoser begins the period known as the Old Kingdom, which would last for the next 500 years. Djoser was the son of a king named Sakemwi, who had reunited Egypt after a period of turmoil, during which the northern delta rose in rebellion. With order now restored, Djoser clearly wanted to keep it that way. Rather than continuing to travel around the country as pharaohs before him had done, he moved to a permanent capital at Memphis, where he could keep a better eye on the restive northern riverlands. Over his nearly 3 decades of rule, he set about an ambitious program of construction, rebuilding temples and throwing up fortresses all along the river. But it was in the manner of his burial that he would truly leave his mark. When Djoser began the construction of his final resting place, it looked a lot like the mastaba tombs of the kings that had come before. But his royal architect soon began dreaming of a more ambitious structure. He was a visionary chancellor and engineer who held numerous official titles in the kingdom, including head of the royal shipyard, royal seal bearer, and overseer of all stone works. His name was The difficulties that engineers like Imhotep faced in building these pyramids were enormous, but their achievement becomes even more impressive when you consider that these monuments also had to be built fast. Today, Egypt is littered with the remains of half-built pyramids. These were abandoned halfway through their construction, usually because the pharaoh who commissioned them had died early. Once a pharaoh was dead, it seemed no one saw any point in continuing to build his tomb. After all, there was a new pharaoh now, and construction on his pyramid would have to begin right away. For this reason, pyramids usually had to be completed, at the very least within 30 years. Only the kings with the longest and most stable reigns would ever live to see the final capstone placed. The next pharaoh after Djoser was a man named Sekhemkhet, who may have been Djoser's brother, and he would join the ranks of the unfinished. As soon as he came to the throne, he began the construction of another stepped pyramid of immense ambition.
Just want to add, just to say about this 13 years old building time of pyramid. it may come out that that is not the truth, you know. It's like an old convention from 19th century that the pyramid were built like 30 years in a span of 30 years within the life of pharaoh, but it may be that that's not the case, because classic academic circles interpreted whatever, see pyramids as only as tombs, which is a big question mark in days to come, I guess.
Sure to dwarf his brother's achievement. But only the first layer of the pyramid was built when Sekhemkhet died, just 6 or 7 years into his reign, and the pyramid was abandoned. Another king, Kabar, also died after 6 years, before his stepped pyramid could be completed. To build each pyramid, the Egyptians would require enormous amounts of labourers, as many as 100,000 per pyramid, with about 10,000 labouring at any one time. There's a widespread misconception that these monuments were built by armies of slaves, but most historians now believe this not to be true. Slavery was an aspect of Egyptian society, as it was across the ancient world, and slaves were mostly taken from prisoners of war, and also from those who fell into debt or committed serious crimes. But slaves were mostly used as domestic servants, or, if they were unlucky, toiled in extraction industries like mining and quarrying. These were considered an underclass and would not have been trusted with the construction of such important and sacred buildings. In fact, evidence shows that the pyramid builders were a mixture of professional artisans and labouring peasants who worked seasonally in exchange for rations. The life of an Egyptian farmer was dictated by the coming and going of the annual floods, and there were only a few times of year when they could be meaningfully employed in the fields. For the rest of the time, they would have leased out their services to construction projects, the digging of canals and other public works, and the construction of pyramids. While they laboured for the king, these workers drank beer 3 times a day and ate meat regularly. They toiled in 3-month shifts and were divided into teams of 20 men. The discovery of their graffiti, hidden on the inward-facing sides of some stone blocks in the pyramids, shows that they gave themselves playful and boisterous team names, some of which have been recorded.
The Friends of Khufu.
The Vigorous Gang.
The followers of the powerful White Crown of Khufu.
Those who know the pharaoh.
The Drunkards of Menkore.
It seems their supervisors fostered a sense of team pride and healthy competition, perhaps giving honours and extra beer rations for those who shifted the most blocks. Doubtless, the work was backbreaking, but over the following millennium, millions of Egyptians would take this deal. Perhaps they also felt a sense of pride at the great constructions they were taking part in, which, if all went well, they would live to see completed. These labourers were sufficiently respected that any who died during the construction were buried in tombs within the royal complex, their bodies forever a part of the monolith they had given their lives to build, an honour that would never have been given to a slave. The vast administrative effort of building these tombs over the next centuries required a fundamental restructuring of Egyptian government. In the past, most of the high positions of state had been doled out to the pharaoh's family. But with such ambitious projects to be completed, skilled people would be needed. In the decades that followed, individual functions of government, such as the master of scribes and controller of workshops, were separated out, and these roles were delegated to capable individuals who were promoted on merit. The Egyptologist Toby Wilkinson summarizes the transformation in the following terms.
As Egypt embarked on pyramid building, The pyramids were building Egypt.
This new caste of civil servants took pride in their work. One Egyptian text of the 5th dynasty records the advice that a vizier named Ptah-hotep gave to his son about how to be a successful administrator.
Let not your heart be puffed up.
So, I think I'm done for today. I'll continue this tomorrow. There is a bunch of stuff to finish, like this arm, this side of cape. We also need to finish the legs, and after that I'm gonna work on effects, magic effects for his helm, for the eyes, also for this. I really like how this spear is made at the end. I really love the design, I love the colors, I love that green reflection from his own costume, you know. I think that this is going to be like really beautiful by the time I finish it. But there is still a lot of work to do, so thank you all for watching and see you next time. Bye bye.